So now we're going to make a start on the actual terrain. So if you haven't done so already, just make sure that you're using a new scene. I've saved mine as terrain 1, so it's a completely blank scene. We're going to go to game object, 3D object and terrain. That's going to create as a new terrain. If we just double click on this, we'll see what this looks like. Okay, it's got this checkerboard pattern on it. I'm just going to switch off my grid so that I'm not seeing that actually. And also switch off this grid as well so it doesn't get in the way. So this is what our terrain looks like at the moment. No textures or anything like that. But I still got my grids switched on. There we go. Switch them off now. Okay, but at the moment it's a little bit too big. So if I go over to inspect, as long as I've got terrain selected, I get all of these options. One of which is the terrain settings on the end. Now what I want to make sure is that as I'm sculpting, my pixel error is not too high, not too low. So I want to make this maybe about a 3. Okay, that's going to mean that I can shape it much better. It's going to give me higher quality. Everything's fine there. But the size of the terrain is a little bit too big. So I'm going to make this about 400 on the width and 400 on the length and about 300 on the height. Okay, makes it a little bit smaller, easier to work with. Now I'm going to change my detail resolution to about 2048 and then my detail resolution per patch, so in other words how much can I add to each patch of this, how much detail. I'm going to make that 128. And then I want to change my height map resolution. Currently it's really small, really low res, to around maybe a 2K. This is going to define how much quality can I actually sculpt on here, how refined is that going to be, how detailed. If it was 512 by 512, that's going to be very low quality. Alright, this becomes much higher quality. Control texture resolution I'm going to make about 1K, and my base texture resolution, this is basically the painting texture, is currently only a 1K texture, so I'm going to really ramp this up to a 4K texture. This means as I paint on this, I'm going to be able to paint really high quality detail. Now it's not going to be overly detailed, but it means that I'm going to get really nice crisp lines, and everything's going to be highly detailed quality. Okay, I've got a little bit of a warning about my light mapping. Okay, try using the real-time indirect resolution setting in the lighting window. So my scale and my light map, I might actually just change this a little bit to 0.0856. It's reached its max atlas size. Okay, so maybe 156. And make this a default low resolution. Okay, so that just gets rid of that error. It's talking about when it was going to be baking lighting, it just was too low. The quality, you wouldn't get very good results. And then if I come up to the top, to the paint terrain, I'm going to actually add that new brush that I was talking about before. So if you click new brush, I'll now search for, I think it was mountain. There it is, Mountain 01, double click and it has set it as a new brush. Alright, excellent. We've only got a small package of brushes, but these should be sufficient enough to actually work on our terrain. Now I want to choose, let's say something like a built-in brush 4, because it's got this nice kind of fall off around the edge. As I move my mouse around, I'm not clicking and dragging, I'm just moving my mouse. It shows me what this is going to look like when I start sculpting. Okay, you can change the brush size just by using the slider, and the opacity is effectively the strength at which you manipulate this. Now at the moment I'm going to be using it with this checkerboard pattern, so it makes it easy to see. And what I want to do is I want to define like an outline around an island. Okay, so to do this, using the drop down, first of all I'm going to set a height for this terrain. At the moment the height is set on 0, So if I try sculpting down into this terrain, it will go nowhere. It cannot go below 0. So if I want to sculpt around the outside of this, I need to first raise this up. So I'm going to raise it up to about 8 meters. I'm going to choose flatten all. That's just going to lift that terrain up a little bit just above the ground. Okay. Now I'm going to go to raise or lower terrain, and it says hold shift and left click to lower. Okay, so that sounds good. Just going to increase my brush size a little bit. That's too big. Yep, that looks good. And my opacity, I'm really going to push this up all the way to 100, so it's absolute strength. And I'm just going to hold shift now and start clicking and dragging in order to create an outline for a particular island. Okay. Oops. Just get rid of that bit. Now you can make the brush smaller if you want more detail. Actually, no, I'm not too bothered about that. Okay. So as you can see, we've got an outline for our island. Okay. Yep, I think that should be fine. Looks interesting. All right. You may want to do that a few times in order to just get that perfectly right. And I think I'll change my terrain to island. Okay, and then what I want to do is basically add a texture that's all grass. Okay, so if I now go to paint texture, it's saying that I need a new terrain layer. So I'm going to edit terrain layer. I'm going to add a layer, and I simply want to type in grass. Oh, no, I've not currently got a layer. So what I want to do is create a layer. Okay, and I want to type in grass. Now there might be quite a lot, but it was the one with the flowers. So I think it was this one. Yep, it's grass flower tint 01 flower blue B base color. Okay, so I'm going to double click, and that instantly gets assigned. So if I just click off this, you can see that we've got all of this interesting kind of grass texture that gets applied universally across the entire thing. I'm going to go to island. I'm going to click on this. And I believe that there is a normal map as well. So if I just type grass, find the normal map next to this one, which is this, double click, and then that gets assigned there. So I'm just going to get pretty close to the edge here, so I can see how big this looks. Now we do have a tiling option. So at the moment it might be a little bit small, so I'm probably going to go with something like about 6 by 6, so it's much bigger. All right, and I want to see what this looks like when I bring my character in here. So let's do character prefabs. Any character, it really doesn't matter. Let's just drag a character in, wait for it to update. Okay, then let's double click to get closer. That's not bad in terms of texture size. Let's try lowering it down to a 5 by 5. Okay, I think that's fine. All right, as a texture type, that's roughly about the right size. Okay, yep, that looks good. So that's our base texture. All right, so on there I can now remove the character for now. What we also need is some water. All right, so to do this, I'm going to go to Game Object, 3D Object, and add a new plane. And I'll call this water. I want to make this pretty big. Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to zero everything out. So 0, 0, 0. And then I'm going to make this around 100 on the X and 100 on the Z. All right, so it's really, really big. Great. And then I'm just going to lift this up a little bit on the Y. So I'm just going to click and drag on the Y just to lift it up a little bit. So that all we're left with basically is just the island. And then we're going to create a material for the water. So let's go into, what was it? Terrain textures. Let's right click, choose create, new material, and I'll call this water texture. And I'm just going to basically add this water to it. So where I've got albedo, I'm just going to type in water. It's going to be this one. Okay. I think everything else is fine. And I'm now just going to apply this to this object so that we get that water kind of look to it. I do have some normal maps for these, so I will be bringing those in possibly in the next video, but I think the tiling needs working on. So tiling, I'm going to make this about 0.2 by 0.2. Oh, that makes it bigger. Let's try 12 by 12. Yep. Okay, so I think that looks a little better. So if we're really, really close to the edge of this terrain, great. Okay, yeah, you can see that. And it looks like I've got a little bit of land showing through there. Just double check. So I'm just going to switch off water. Yeah, a little bit of land stuck up there. So just going to go back to raise or lower terrain. Just hold shift and there we go. All right. Excellent. Okay. Now what I want in the middle of this terrain is some kind of a raised platform area. So if I click on island, I want to go to set height. And this is where I'm going to use this particular tool. And the height that I want it to go is basically higher than the island itself, which is set at 8. So I want this to come all the way up to about 14. Okay. And I want my brush size to be a lot bigger. All right, so it takes up more space. Now at the moment I've got quite a lot of fall off going on that brush, which you can see. I don't want that much fall off. So what I'm going to do is click on the brush itself, click on this little triangle, and we get a brush remap. So what I can do with this, if I click and drag on this, I'm actually going to limit the amount of fall off that's happening on that side, which is going to give me much steeper kind of cliff edges. And then if I also click and drag on this side, notice how in the picture it's going a lot whiter. That's going to give me more of a kind of a plateau effect. So in fact I actually want to really drag that down. It's looking interesting. Drag this up. Yeah, so I get something that looks more like this, which is far more interesting. So what I want to do then is simply just click in order to set that nice bit of detail that's going on there. So if our character is running around, this is kind of the area where the town might be located. The rest of it is more like a village, like the outer angles. Now I do want the character to be able to kind of climb up here. So if I go back to island, this time I'm wanting to go to smooth height. Okay, my blur direction, the more blur you have, the more power this smoothing has. So I want to set this to about an 8. Ooh, that may be too much. Let me try 2. Oh, maybe it goes all the way up to 1 actually. Yeah, it does. So I want to try 0.08. Okay, I'm going to go to something like a really soft brush. Bring my brush size way down. Something like this is good. And bring the opacity down, so this is the strength. Maybe just a little bit more. A little bit more. Okay, I'm going to bring this up. Let me just try really going crazy on this. Okay, let me try something a little bit stronger. Basically, I just want to try and flatten this out a little bit, so I might actually go to raise or lower terrain, bring the opacity way down. Brush size is still good. I'm going to basically hold shift as I just click on this slightly. So notice how it's kind of lowering itself down, and then back to smooth height and try and smooth that out a little bit. We try the blur direction going in the opposite. No, doesn't have a massive impact there, but that's an area where you could effectively walk up into the town. We'll do a little bit more work on that a little bit later. Okay, so let's maybe we'll probably make a start on this area. Let's have this as kind of a beach. But I think that's something that we'll do in the next session once we fix this water and get this water working correctly.